Hey, I'm ZSH Plays, and today we are building the perfect sea lion habitat. This is Penguin Cove, and behind it is where we're going to be building today. The habitat is based on the Galapagos Islands at Houston Zoo, which is, in my opinion, the best sea lion habitat in the world. It features multiple viewpoints, a cave for guests, and an underwater tunnel. Here's the building site. Let's go. This habitat is probably the most complex that we've ever tried on this channel, so it's probably best that I explain how it works in Houston and then how it's going to work here. So the sea lion part of the Galapagos Islands habitat at Houston Zoo features a plaza with both under and overwater viewing of the sea lions. It's got amphitheatre style seating where you can see them above the water. It's got a cave that the guests can go into where you can see them above water, underwater and on land, and it's got an underwater tunnel as well, and we're going to be replicating the majority of that here. The most important thing in this build is what we're doing here, which is getting the barriers right. So the big pool for the sea lions, which we're building here, is kind of split into two parts. And the way it works is that there's some fairly low glass, I think it's about 2 meters tall, with the water coming right up to the top of the glass almost. That keeps the sea lions in. Beyond that is an area of concrete, and then there's a second set of glass barriers which are much taller, and then there's a raised path behind them so the guests can see over the second set of barriers, which is what keeps them out of the habitat, and then the drop down from there to the concrete is what stops the sea lions from jumping out of the pool. They're pretty intelligent, and they can obviously see that if they jump out they're going to end up stranded in a little ditch of concrete, so they just stay in the pool even though the water's only a few inches below the top of the glass. This is the first set of glass barriers done. You can see it's just above the water level there. Now we're going to dig out the terrain so it's much deeper in the second part of the pool than it is the first, because this is where the underwater tunnel goes, and then we'll dig out the first part of the pool and join it up through this channel here. Now whilst there's an underwater tunnel at the Houston Zoo, when you try and build an underwater tunnel in Planet Zoo, you end up with this. Now we can probably cover up those crazy edges on the paths, but the real problem for me with underwater tunnels, when you walk through it, you basically get the underwater effect, even though you're supposedly on dry land, and that happens at head height. The only way to stop it is to have the camera down by the floor. That's not going to be how we view the zoo. So in our sea lion shores, what we're going to have is an underwater viewing dome instead. What we're doing here is building the concrete drop in between the first and the second set of barriers. So we're just going to spin these big concrete bricks around the barriers that we've already placed in, do a little bit of tidying up where they meet, and then we get a nice smooth circle that surrounds the first set of barriers, and then we can start putting in the second set of barriers. So these are the barriers that keep the guests out of the habitat. So we're just going to place them in pretty much the same as the first barriers, and then later on we're going to make them much taller so we can get all the paths in. We also need to add in the entrance to the underwater viewing dome, and we can't attach that to the glass on the left, which is where it's going to go, because that barrier is holding in water. So what we need to do is build some null barriers around the outside of the glass to give us the room to get the entrance in. In order to get this to work, we're going to have to set all the glass barriers that are no longer on the outside to not be habitat barriers, so the game will still recognize the habitat. So we need to make that a little bit bigger. And there we go, there's the entrance. And then we're going to use more null barriers so that we can get a habitat gate in, because again, that can't be attached to anything that's holding in water. And we also need a little off-show area where the sea lions can go and where the keepers can get into as well. All right, I think we are done with the barriers now. Let's move on to the fun bit, the decorating. So there's going to be an enormous amount of rock work in this habitat. It's basically going to be all the walls of the habitat. It's either going to be glass or it's going to be rocks. And the first thing that we're going to make is the combination of cliff and cave that forms the backdrop to the habitat. So the rock work goes from the floor up and over the water and then down the other side, which is what forms the cave. And then the guests are able to actually go into the cave and view the sea lions from there, as well as from the big plaza on the outside and the seating and the underwater dome as well. There is a lot of variety in this habitat. So we're going to use the faux rocks, kind of similar to the little penguin beach that we built. I really like the rock work in that habitat. I don't want to reuse it because we've got a completely different shape going on here. So we're going to make something fairly similar to create all the different shapes that we need and get this cave started. The key to good rock work in Planet Zoo, as far as I'm concerned, is to make one really nice piece that you're really happy with just a few rocks, and then use modified version of that piece all the way throughout the habitat, rather than just trying to build one giant wall all in one go. As long as you're careful about moving elements and adding one here and taking one away there, you can normally use basically one piece to create the entire thing. This is our one piece that we're basically going to be using. So we'll move this into position where the cave is going to start, and then we'll copy it and start getting the height that we need. and then we'll start making little changes to this second one so that it doesn't look exactly the same as the first. So that this rock here, we'll just spin this round, move it back in to the larger rocks behind it, and then it will give us a completely different look. There we go, no longer looks copy pasted. And then we'll get some smaller rocks on the top so we don't have that sort of flat top to it, which looks kind of weird. We'll make the color of the cracks in the rocks much lighter as well to get rid of that really harsh look that they have here. That looks a lot more natural. And then with that piece, we will copy it again. And you can see where the cave is forming now. We're going to use one of these longer pieces here to make the underside of the cave a bit smoother. And then one final piece of these rocks, and that is the cave. You can see how the water goes underneath it. And then on the other side of it, if you stand there, you'll be able to see both above and below the water and down into the depth below. Then we're going to take that entire piece that we used and copy that to form the entrance. So the guests can go in and out of the cave through two different entrances. The one on the left will join up with the African area, and the one on the right will join up to the main plaza for this habitat. And then after that through to the Night House and Penguin Cove. Looking good, probably the most rocks we've ever used in a habitat, this one. There is a lot more to go. What I'm going to do now is introduce another animal to the area. So we're going to have the diamondback terrapins in here as well, seeing as they live in coastal environments in the US as well. Not in the sea obviously, but they're like brackish waters near the coast. So I thought they'd fit in really nicely here, and they're one of my favourite exhibit animals. They're pretty sizable by exhibit animal standards, and they actually move, which is nice. And then we're going to create the first of the beaches for the sea lions. So there's going to be a beach here and then a beach on the other side of this rear pool. And then there's going to be loads of rocks that they can get up onto as well. So we're using some concrete and even more rocks just to create this little beach here. And once these rocks are in, we'll move back to the interior and start doing some more work there. So we're going to cover up this default glass divider with some wood. And then I've used art pieces and lights to make the terrapin habitat much smaller than it is by default. These guys need a fairly sizable habitat, I'd say, because they're quite big and we'll have a few of them. But I think this is a much nicer size. We're going to drop some mangrove roots and things like that in here as well, and some more plants just to make it a bit more interesting looking. There's one of the terrapins now. I think that sits in nicely. And now it's time for the seating. So we're going to have raised seating here so the guests get a really good view of the sea lions. We'll have an animal talk point here as well. So there's like a show going on, not that we'll be having any tricks or anything like that in this zoo. So we're going to use some gridded paths raised off the floor here to create a base for the seats, and then we'll put some steps in to get the guests up here. Yes, I know these should be ramps really, but trying to build ramps in Planet Zoo is such a nightmare. I tend to go with stairs in a smaller area like this, and then put ramps in when we've got bigger areas. Then we're going to drop the guest seating in at the back, so we end up with a two-tiered effect. And then we're going to use plaster to cover up pretty much all of the paths and the steps so we can get everything to look exactly the same. I'm going to keep the wooden sort of bleacher style seating, I like that. Everything else is going to be covered up in plaster. The first job is to cover up the path steps with this plaster trim. We're going to be using the same colour scheme that we used in the water terrace and we used throughout the zoo. I really like that consistency. And then we'll keep copying these down here to get all of the stairs covered up. And then what we're going to do is put more wood into the guest seating so that we can get a really consistent look going from the top of the seats down to the bottom. And then we're going to put smaller pieces of wood in to extend the stairs on either side, and some concrete as well, so that we get a completely seamless join between all of the seats so they don't just look like separate items anymore. Just makes it look so much more realistic when you do this. Definitely worth the time. We'll cover up the joins between these paths with yet more plaster, and then we'll cover up the path in the middle of them with even more plaster and put some railings in, and there we go. We've got a really seamless looking set of seating there, which I really like. Back to the interior, I've put a floor in, and later on we're going to colour match that exactly to the volcanic path, which is what we're going to be using to get people in and out of this area. Next up, the plaza. We're going to bring in some of the circular elements, which are a motif that we use throughout this zoo. So we've got this cream one here, and then we're going to bring in a larger kind of peach coloured one. We're going to build these up to get the plaza for the guests going. Cannot have enough circles in this zoo. I'll use them wherever possible, and these kind of ultra modern builds are really good for this kind of design. We're going to use more plaster panels to fill out this circle here so that it meets up with the lighter colour circle in the middle, and just get everything nice and smooth and seamless the way we like it. And then we're going to finish off this seating. So I've got some more concrete here, which we're going to paste across the top. With the rock work at the back, This is looking really good. Let's check out our drone cam and see how we're getting on. That is a lot of rocks. If you're thinking it's looking a little bare, don't worry, there's a whole world of foliage that's going to go on top of this. But for now, I want to make sure that the glass is looking good. So we're going to cover up these dividers with some of these metal poles, and then possibly the hardest part of the build, which is getting the paths in. So getting raised paths around here seems pretty simple. You can just link them to the barriers. The problem is, because they're raised, that's giving us these curbs, and I really don't want those curbs to be visible. So I'm just putting these in so that I know roughly where the guests are going to be standing, and we can get the glass to the correct height. And then I'm going to delete these paths and actually raise the terrain to the same level so that we can put in paths that don't count as being raised and don't have curbs on. That's going to make it much easier to then cover everything up with the plaster that we want to get a super smooth look to this plaza. Time for some more plaster. So we're going to use the same bricks as before, just a different colour, and we'll use these to join the raised plaza to the lowered concrete area for the sea lions. Next up, we're going to use plaster panels to start covering up the paths that we just created. And these need to go from here all the way back to where the plaza is going to end, and basically cover everything up so it looks nice and smooth and flat, even though we've got loads of different height changes going on here. I'll spare you the hour or so it took me to put these in. This was an absolute nightmare. But basically we're just trying to join high bits to low bits as smoothly as possible and get something that looks really uniform when it's done. So just loads of different plaster panels, loads of different sizes, loads of different angles, working on it until eventually it starts to look smooth. So we've got another big circle at the back here. That is the back of the plaza. We'll have some seating up there. And then we can move on to the roof and the planting. I want this to look really realistic, and we're going to exactly replicate what they have at Houston. So we're going to use the terrain stamp to put actual terrain at the top of the rocks here, just below the level of where the rocks are, so we can then plant that up with all sorts of trees and bushes and shrubs, etc. That's what they have at Houston. I really like the way it looks, so we're going to do that here. Just need to be mindful of making sure the terrain is in the right place so that it's always below the rocks, and we need it to be nice and thin as well so that it's not intruding into the interior below. And then later on we're going to use some more rocks to line the bottom of this terrain so the interior looks like a cave. One more little bit to do just here, and then we can move on to the plants. So what I'm going to do is try and combine the planting that I saw in the reference images and videos with a slightly more Californian feel to it. So we're going to have a few more temperate trees here, and then some more palms and things like that as well, and just concentrate mainly on how it looks. We've got some cactus in here as well, seeing as we're in California, and some of the dry buffalo grass, and we'll just use this to cover up pretty much all of the terrain that we've just put in, really. And then I did something with the hosta plants that I really liked. Is it hosta? Hosta? Don't know how it's pronounced. But if you put a little bundle of them together and then group it, and then you can kind of use it to simulate a climbing plant. I really like the way this looks. I put this in lots of the different parts where the soil is sort of spilling down the rocks, so it's growing down the sides of the rocks. I think this looks really nice. I'm going to be doing this a lot more in builds going forward, I think. Makes a change from using ivy everywhere anyway. Let's move on to the inside of the cave. We're going to put the final touches on here with some rocks on the underside of that terrain to get the cave feel in. This is how the garden's coming along. Just want to make sure that the rocks don't poke through there. And then we're going to add a canopy to the seating area. We are not going to be making the canopy though. This was made by Toves. This is one of his workshop items which I've just copied, and then we're going to heavily modify this so it perfectly fits over this seating area here. The way he's used the art shapes to make this canopy that hangs down, it looks so good. Would take a very long time, possibly infinity, to make something looking this good myself. So I'm going to use his blueprint. We're going to add loads more art pieces to it to get them to join together. So we end up with one big kind of canopy that covers up this seating area. There we go. Love how that looks. I think it suits this area really nicely. Now, something I really liked in the exhibit I was looking at, which you see a lot of in zoos, and we haven't done it yet, is a little set of boards where you name it and have a photograph of each of the animals in the habitat. So I want a little poster for each one of our sea lions. We're using the smallest poster size here, the 0.5 meter billboards. And if you've ever tried to use these yourself, you might have noticed that the images tend to look awful when you put them on here. I have the solution, and that means it's time for Franchise Masters. So for some reason, the 0.5 meter billboard is at a different aspect ratio to every other billboard in the game. The square billboards are at a 1:1 ratio, i.e. they are the same width as they are tall. All the widescreen billboards like this one are at the 16:9 ratio you would expect, but these ones are actually at 3:2. Now, if 16:9, 3:2, 1:1, all of that stuff means absolutely nothing to you, don't worry about it. All you need to know is that to get an image to look good on these billboards, it needs to be 456 pixels wide by 304 pixels tall, and when you place the image on the billboard, it will look like this, not the stretchy mess it normally is. Just 2 more things to go and the build is complete. Firstly, I want to replicate one of the things they have at the real habitat, which is fake starfish, which are scattered all over the habitat, really realistic ones. Not sure I'm going to get it as realistic as that, but we're going to use the multicolored egg piece to build some little starfish, which we can put on the rocks throughout the habitat. This is right by the cave viewing window. We'll have a few here, and I'm going to put some on the rocks outside, adding a bit of variety to the habitat. So we've got random rotation on, we've got the flexi-coloured egg, we're just going to drag it around, and the further we sink it into the rock, the smaller it will appear, so we can make the legs for the starfish. We use some larger parts for the body in the middle, and just keep placing them down until we get a shape that we're happy with, that looks nice and natural. Nobody's going to be getting too close to this, so when we're at the sort of guest positions, it's going to look pretty good. One last thing to do is to add a sign to both ends of the area. This is literally just one rock with a font on it, but I think it looks really effective when it's sunk into the other rocks. And that is the Sea Lion Shores complete. Let's check it out. Here's the plaza for the guests. Well worth all the concrete panels, I think. And here are the sea lions. I love this view. This is taken from the underwater viewing dome. The view from the seating with the extra path that means the guests actually come up here. And this is the view from the cave. This is my favourite view. It was a photo of a sea lion in this part of the habitat that made me want to build this. Here's the other side of the interior with the entrance to the viewing dome and a little terrapin. Let's take a look at the whole thing. So happy with how this turned out. There should be one more viewing window on the inside where you can see the sea lions on that little spit of land on the left of the screen, but I just ran out of space to have enough land for them to get onto, but with them having enough space to actually swim into the part by the viewing gallery, that was more important to me, so I left that viewing window out. And there you go, that's Sea Lion Shores. This is where we started building today, and this is where we are now. Got a lot done in a week. Very happy with that. Let's check out the Explorers Club monolith. Side 2 is almost full now. We're gonna have to think about what happens next. Maybe if I move it to the left, we can start going on to side 3 as well. Thank you so much to all of you who have joined. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to join, and I'll see you again next week.